What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here in our podcast. What's going on in pop culture right now? Got a smaller one this week, but still some things I'm excited to talk about. I wanted to see A24's The Legend of Ochi. I didn't get to it. Therefore, what we do have, though, is the return of Andor for Season 2 on Disney+. Let's go. The surprise sequel to Ben Affleck's The Accountant 2. Didn't expect to ever say that. Netflix's action film Havoc, starring Tom Hardy. And also our 2025 XXL freshman list predictions. At last, it's time to do that once again. So make sure you subscribe, youtube.com/nostalgiapod, linktree.com/nostalgiapod. See the links below. Get the best of 2025 Spotify post linked below. Let me know it's good. Let's get into it. What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of Havoc, the new action film from Gareth Evans, out now on Netflix. This film stars Tom Hardy. And yeah, I was primarily interested in Havoc because this is a film that has been in development for such a long time. This film was shot in 2021, and there was all this development hell, will this movie even come out type talk around Havoc. So then when it finally, with kind of little fanfare, got a release date, and then it in fact came out on Netflix, I was like, we had to see what all the fuss was about. Of course, part of the reason that this film was delayed was because apparently it needed reshoots, which of course got strike delayed, so I guess that makes some sense. But even still, those reshoots probably could have happened before the strike, so perhaps there were scheduling issues. Either way, the movie is here, and of course, Gareth Evans deserves a lot of attention as a filmmaker. Of course, the director of the Raid films, big part of this TV series Gangs of London. Gareth Evans is really, I think, well known and deservedly in that class of the current action filmmaking greats. You know, when we think of like a Chad Stahelski or a David Leitch, the creators that can make the really compelling action choreography within films that we think of today. Netflix's Havoc is worth watching for the standout set pieces that we come to expect from Gareth Evans. Tom Hardy is doing the very familiar mold that we know from him at this point, mumbling, dour, not very charismatic, and gruff. It is getting a bit tired. I would like him to switch it up. He acquits himself well in the action with this film, unsurprisingly. Nothing really stands out about the plot or the storytelling with Havoc, but two key sequences, one within a nightclub and one within a small house, are incredibly fun, creative, choreographed action. And because this film is from Gareth Evans, that action really stands out for its off-the-wall nature, and it's quite a lot of fun. However, when we're not in those action set pieces where Evans is flexing on us, there's nothing too exciting going on. And I guess I should actually factor in the opening set sequence as well, where we see this elaborate, heist car chase concluding in a washing machine full of cocaine being thrown into the windshield of a pursuing cop car. And right away you get the frenetic whip pans and just kind of crazy camera work, crazy energy of Evans's film and his style. And it, kind of reminds you of what you're doing. I think in general, like, the film kind of gives off like generic Gotham City, Sin City, rough urban center, vibe. Shot in the UK. I'm not sure what city it's supposed to even be, really, but it feels very gruff, and I think there's just enough like flair to the color grading and the cinematography that it actually looks pretty solid for Netflix movies that are coming out not during the fall award season. You even get this moment where Tom Hardy, who plays a cop that's pretty crooked, he's definitely done shady stuff that we see revealed in some flashbacks. He has these connections to Forrest Whitaker's Eric Adams stand-in corrupt politician. Hardy's no saint by any means, but we see him do this almost like Batman detective, like in his head visualization of a crime scene. It definitely gave me like Gotham vibes for sure, like Arkham Asylum type stuff. Overall, I'd say the plot is pretty overstuffed, and the plot you are getting isn't anything too crazy. It's always fun to have a triad crime story featuring crooked cops. Like all the ingredients are here. Something really stands out all too much. I think there's probably a few too many characters. You don't get enough time to really spend much attachment to them. But again, like, if you're here just for the sequences, and the sequences I think definitely deliver. I will say, like, the beginning of the movie almost felt like, to me, like the audio mixing was like kind of off. I was constantly turning it up and turning it down, and I don't know if that's just Tom Hardy's way of delivering lines these days, where sometimes it's hard to understand what he's saying. He's thankfully not wearing a mask in this movie. He's playing off the meme at this point. And to get to that nightclub scene, actually starts off with a oneer shot, a la the Copacabana, shout out Scorsese, I guess. And that's pretty fun. And it doesn't take long for Timothy Oliphant's crooked cop to be revealed as the killer. That's kind of, result of the inciting incident that kicks off all the plot. It's obviously fun to have him be an antagonist. He's such a charming, charismatic performer, as we know, and he's really playing into that with this. I think the nightclub scene too, like, it definitely holds up its end of the bargain as nightclub fight scenes go. I think very recently, of course, of John Wick Chapter 4. The scene with was it in Germany, in Berlin? Was it? Obviously that was incredible. But like Tom Hardy does his awesome slide tackle in this scene. There's just a ton of fighting with all kinds of hand-to-hand combat. It's quite good. And then you get this house fight that is really off the walls later. I mean, you see this like slow-mo shotgun double tap. There's stuff falling on the people. Hardy and friends are grabbing weapons off people they kill to keep shooting and keep up the pace. There's a verticality aspect when people go under the house and shoot from below. There's a crazy harpoon gun kill on one of the heavies. Like, it's good stuff. I think if you're an action fan, like you want to see like action done well, this movie is worth watching for all of that. Now, it doesn't have the world building and the lore, and of course the audience connection to the characters, like the John Wick franchise. Of course, it doesn't. But Havoc, honestly, given all the trouble and bad buzz around the movie for the past few years after it was originally shot, turned out pretty decently. And I think this is a movie that, of course, will do very well on Netflix. This is a perfect fit on streaming, to be honest. Let me know what you think of Netflix's Havoc. What you like most about the film? And for more movie reviews, subscribe. And I'll see you next time. What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of The Accountant 2, the action thriller film from Gavin O'Connor, starring Ben Affleck and Jon Bernthal. The Accountant 2. This film is the sequel to the 2016 film The Accountant, starring Ben Affleck. Bernthal reprising his role now in a co-lead fashion for the sequel. And yeah, I think the common first refrain with this has been that no one was really clamoring for a sequel to The Accountant, which it's an amusing film to get a sequel, of course. I think The Accountant was a, solidly received film back in 2016, but to have a sequel come out, you look under the hood a little bit, it makes some sense, right? This is produced by Artist Equity, Damon and Affleck's company, seen what they wanted to make it, and they made it happen. I think that is pretty cool. And while not everyone is returning from the first film, Anna Kendrick is not back once again, you do have this film returning in I think, an intriguing fashion. And the funniest thing about it is The Accountant 2 has been pretty warmly received. This film has been more warmly received than the first one, despite the fact that everyone thought this was a completely unnecessary, unasked for sequel. So it's, I think, a pretty unexpected development, obviously, in a good way. The Accountant 2 is better than its predecessor because it smartly pairs Ben Affleck's autistic accountant character with his charming, roguish brother played by Jon Bernthal. The film is now a Affleck-Bernthal two-hander, and the chemistry that they have between each other is really genuine, and Bernthal is just such a charming performer that the movie has a lot of heart and a lot more than you would have expected. Is the action thriller stuff of that much interest? No, not really. It doesn't really descend into full-on action till the very end. Is there much depth to its human trafficking plot? Like, are you really connected to a lot of those other ancillary characters? No, not really. But the key dynamic between Affleck and Bernthal and just watching them be together, whether they're shooting the shit, whether they're mad at each other, whether they're staying loyal to one another, all that actually really works. I think there's also like a lot of like fun, obviously a lot of stuff's quite ridiculous, but there's a lot of fun like elements to like the world of The Accountant. Of course, again, Ben Affleck's character, Christian Wolf, is this freelance accountant for criminal enterprises and cartels and mafias and things like that in terms of uncooking their books to look for like fraud and who's stealing from them and stuff. It's a fun enough premise, but I love the inclusion of this, school for like, gifted savant type children, children with these interesting gifts that need crafting, right? I love how there's like these super team of kids that can like hack into anything. Like, it's just a fun aspect of the world, and how Affleck's, partner, his like oracle behind the scenes, is able to contact them and use them, and you're openly rooting for them to like hack into like normal people's cameras and computers and stuff to like help save the day. Like a lot of that I think is actually quite enjoyable, and there's some fun humor alongside all that. And bringing in Bernthal like to the fore. Remember, he was like kind of like an antagonist, supporting antagonist in the first movie, and now he's brought in pretty early to help support Christian on this larger journey to help rectify this problem. And it, again, like, is like the genesis of a lot of the plot, like something you're super connected to. Not really. You have J.K. Simmons reprising his role from the first movie. He's this like head of the U.S. Treasury that actually uncovered Wolf's identity. He, in between movies, got attached to this Mexican family who was migrating, trying to immigrate to the U.S., and ran in with the cartels, and bad things happened. And we're not really connected to like a lot of that plot, even though it really drives us forward. But again, like I think having Bernthal to play off Affleck, right? Because Affleck's playing an autistic character. I think he does a pretty good job. I think it's a pretty compellingly restrained performance, but there's a lot of humor. Nothing's ever at the expense of, him being autistic and not perceiving and understanding certain social dynamics, right? Like nothing's ever played for laughs in a negative way. I think it's actually like in a charming, positive fashion, to be honest. And then you have Bernthal's character who, him struggling to like have a relationship with his brother because his brother is not able to express affection and care in the traditional way. It feels like a real genuine like character dynamic, And I mean, the introduction of Bernthal in this movie, where he's like, doing some hitman job, because that's what his character is, this freelance hitman for for criminals and whatnot. Having him do this like hilarious like rant and like help hype himself up in his underwear in his hotel. Like again, like this guy just can really sell anything. He's just such a charmer. And you just think about like what Bernthal's up to these days. I mean, he's just seemingly in everything. Right, like he has a 2-scene role in The Amateur, the Rami Malek spy thriller, and he's great in that. Of course, he had a 2-episode, role in Daredevil: Born Again season 1, returning as the Punisher, great in that. Obviously, we know he'll be back for a 1-episode flashback cameo in The Bear season 4, whenever that comes out. And then again, unexpected, least hyped of them all, you have him being the saving grace of the Accountant sequel, and the reason why it's better than the first one. I mean, the guy is crushing. It's great. So yeah, like I don't think there's not much to analyze or think about with the plot and the dynamics and any of that with the Accountant 2, but it's really just about these two characters and how they play off each other, and it's like the chemistry and the relationship is fun stuff. To be honest, I really enjoyed the movie. Wasn't expecting too much, but it definitely exceeded my expectations. Let me know, though, what did you think of The Accountant 2? Were you also pleasantly surprised, like seemingly most people were? Let me know. And for more movie reviews, subscribe. I'll see you next time. What's up, Mac Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of Andor Season 2. Yes, Star Wars live action, Star Wars TV is finally back after being pretty barren for the past few years. We're not getting too much. Obviously, we know the big challenge with Star Wars storytelling has largely been just getting it out there in the first place. But yes, Andor is finally back after concluding at the end of 2022. And of course, this is a super welcome return because Andor Season 1 was absolutely phenomenal. One of the best shows of the year. Clearly the best Star Wars TV show ever made. And yes, I would stand on that over Clone Wars and Rebels, which of course are both excellent. But Andor stood out so much, and there was so much talk and hype about it because it was, quote, Star Wars for grown-ups, but it was really Star Wars with just a different tact of intelligence. There was a maturity to it and a dramatic tension to its themes that was just, I think, a bit deeper than what you get in a lot of other Star Wars storytelling. And we think about the enduring appeal of what people like so much about Star Wars. A big part of that, I think a big part of the continuing promise and prospect of future Star Wars storytelling has always been that Star Wars can truly be about anything, because the universe is just so awesome and has just so much to it that telling all kinds of different stories within Star Wars has always been an appealing thing, at least on the surface, at least in theory. Now, we haven't really gotten a lot of that in execution from Lucasfilm the last few years, but that appeal has never gone away. And Andor being something that's a little darker, a little clearly leaning towards more adults in terms of straight up more dramatic fare, but really portraying real characters that feel like real people. Also, just really expert writing on a part of the creative team behind the series. You know, Tony Gilroy working with Dan Gilroy and Beau Willimon. Like, they're just some real talent behind the scenes in terms of the crafting of this series. And I think it just goes a long way in terms of bringing people in to, a science fiction story set in the Star Wars universe. I think another big appeal of this series has been that it shoots on location. This was not shot on the volume like The Mandalorian. And when we think about the years that have, followed since The Mandalorian first premiered on Disney Plus, I think the volume style shooting, of course, the trademark large LED walls kind of, evolving and taking to the next level the approach to green screens in a way that's a lot more compelling to work with and act on than, say, how the Star Wars prequels came to be, 20-something years ago. The volume, though, does have a bit of a flatness, does have some limitations. And I think people have kind of grown a bit tired of that visual palette that you also saw on Ahsoka as well, but really is, the trademark of the Mandalorian's visuals, and the way that Mandalorian was able to shoot in California, something that we don't really get that much anymore from Hollywood. Andor, though, shoots on location, and Andor looks spectacular as a result. Well, you think of all the various locations in season 1, I think specifically of like the Aldhani heist arc, right? There's just such engaging visuals from when you shoot at Pinewood and then you shoot out in the world. It just looks great. And the start of Andor season 2 is continuing that trend for sure. And I think the success of Andor Season 1 has also been particularly impressive because this is a prequel series starring a supporting character that wasn't like super popular or anything. Cassian Andor, not the star of Rogue One. Rogue One itself, a prequel film. Of course, one of, if not the most celebrated Star Wars movie of the Disney era. Making a prequel to the prequel was, I think, to some, like a cynical thing to do. And yet Andor was able to really stand alone and stand out and wow people, despite the fact that we know the fate of its lead character, of course, because we've all seen Rogue One. Also, interestingly, with Andor Season 2, it appears that the series will be released 3 episodes a week, doing basically a full narrative arc each week. So it'll wrap up in, about a month's time. If you think back to season 1, they did a 3-episode drop to start and then did 1 episode a week to conclude the season. I think that's an interesting approach, because Andor season 1, and we assume season 2, was conceived and told of in this like 3-episode narrative arc structure. So giving us 1 arc at a time each week with season 2 is, I think pretty exciting. So this is going to be a really fun month. Andor season 2 continues the impressive appeal of this Star Wars series. This is Star Wars with a lot of intelligence, impeccable craft, visuals, acting, screenwriting particularly. The show is able to command a lot of tension and intrigue despite the fact that it is a prequel to the Star Wars prequel movie where we know the fate of the series' lead character. The show's approach to the origin of the Rebel Alliance and how messy and gray and difficult that is feels so grounded, but it also carries so much intrigue if you're a Star Wars fan. And the show has already proven that it can deliver great monologues, impactful character deaths, and in general, just a lot of intrigue. The return of Krennic and soon K2SO is also very exciting. But above all, I'm just really happy to be back in the Star Wars world from creators that I really trust. The Gilroys and Beau Willimon really know what they're doing, and I have complete faith that season 2 is going to be really satisfying. Andor is also excellent at giving you tons of lore. I think right off the bat, with season 2, we go to Senior. I never knew actually how to say it. Senior Fleet Systems, where the TIE fighters get produced and whatnot. And Cassian goes undercover there and steals a prototype TIE. When I first see it docked, I'm like, oh, he's going to steal a TIE Interceptor. That's pretty cool. But you actually realize that, no, it's not TIE Interceptor. It seemingly is the TIE Avenger, front and center in the canon. Once again, that's super cool. Reference to the TIE Fighter video game from decades ago. I enjoyed that. I also enjoyed that. I was like, challenging to fly and not like super easy. Like I love the like I think like so many grounded aspects to that way this show tells its story. It's just interesting. It feels tactical. It just feels real. And Cashin struggling to fly this ship he's never even seen before, I think feels real, feels right. And I also love that Cashin gets briefly sidelined in this arc where his whole plan, obviously orchestrated, from Luthen up on high, but like this whole plan goes completely awry, like where his drop is compromised, who he's supposed to meet, he never sees, and he encounters this quickly splintering group of rebels. And I've enjoyed how Andor has communicated the fledgling and disparate nature of the Rebel Alliance, right? Like, you remember when Luthen and Saw Gerrera meet in season 1, and they end up sacrificing a whole other cell, to keep the general deception alive, things like that, right? Seeing this group come apart at the seams at the first sign of trouble when their leader isn't there and they start getting hungry. I thought it was really compelling because it feels real, that desperation, both in the short-term and long-term needs of this group, and Cashin caught in the middle of it completely, unwittingly. I thought it was done really well. And then I love the reveal at the end of, I believe that was episode 2, where he gets able to take off and leave those rebels again, and we realize that he was on Yavin 4 the whole time. We see the Masai temples as he flies away. Like, that's just a fun little nod for the fans, right? And before, Cashin flies away, we go to, Minarao, this planet where there's like this grain production, right? All this harvesting. And that's where Bix and co have, left Ferrix 4 and hidden away there. And when I first saw that planet, I was like, oh, this is like kind of like Dantooine vibes, visually and whatnot. Then I thought to myself, I wonder if Rogue One is going to take us to the base on Dantooine. That, of course, gets abandoned. The reference in A New Hope where Leia gives the old, outdated info to Tarkin, right? I think that would be a super fun tie-in. Not necessary, of course, but that'd be fun lore tie-in. Made me think about that. But then, you see the Yavin 4 reference in episode 2, and I'm like, will they give us both bases? I'm not too sure. Obviously, Yavin 4 is front and center in Rogue One. Yeah, so that was just a thought I had, about the general lore. Watching the Rebels do like some kind of Star Wars version of rock, paper, scissors, I thought was super fun. There's also, I think, another big lore job that's probably not as like super well known, but when we get the introduction of Orson Krennic, Ben Mendelsohn returning to the role from Rogue One, we get the introduction of Krennic in, I believe, again, that second episode, or it's the first, I'm not sure, in this arc. And there's this whole plan with all these higher-ups, including Deirdre, where, the Empire needs calcite. They need to go to this planet and get these resources, right? Because that's how they roll. And this is actually a lead up to a famous event, the Gorman Massacre, which leads to the official open declaration of the Rebel Alliance on the part of Mon Mothma and the Rebels once they're more organized. That's like a few years away in the timeline, but it seems like Andor Season 2 is going to jump ahead a few years because it introduces us at 4 years before the Battle of Yavin. So 4 years before, Rogue One. 1 year having passed since the end of Season 1. So we have some ground to cover, but again, it's exciting because the show is clearly aware of where it needs to go, again, seeding these references. So I think it's just done with such grace, and it's so cool to me too that like Tony Gilroy has like said that like he's not a guy with like a ton of reverence for Star Wars per se, but he's someone who's compelled by good storytelling. Obviously, that's why he's one of the most celebrated screenwriters and script doctors in the last 30 years of Hollywood, right? And him just approaching Star Wars the way he has been so awesome. And of course, Lucasfilm and the story group and whatnot make sure that like that lore stuff gets seeded in from him. And man, I just think it really gels. It really works. Overall, you could say this premiere is like a little slow, little table setting, right? Cashin comes in and saves the day at the end. I mean, there's a fucking sexual assault scene from an Imperial officer towards Bix, pretty graphic. Obviously, she gets the upper hand and wins out in the end, but that was certainly real. But also, again, it feels, like something that would happen with Imperial officers pushing their authority around, right? Kind of similarly, all that Mina Rao storyline about the undocumented immigration and using up these immigrants for the production of resources and then casting them aside and ratting them out at the end, openly riffing on politics and modern day commentary and whatnot, but doing it within Star Wars in I think a non-preachy way is, I think, again, really effective stuff. Interesting that you have Cyril and Deirdre seemingly living together and getting into some sort of relationship after he saves her at the end of season 1. This certainly skips ahead a little bit in that relationship for our purposes, but Deirdre basically big dogging Cyril's mom and taking over that domineering strange relationship he's had with his mom. Interesting for sure. I'm curious where that's going to go. Deirdre is certainly a very calculated character, and I love that she's now very close in proximity to Krennic, because obviously Krennic is, I think, a pretty iconic character. To be honest, I hope we get a lot of him. I thought Mendelsohn was so amazing in Rogue One, and if you think about the great new Star Wars characters from the Disney era, I think he's right up there with Kylo. And then we have all that Chandrila stuff with Mon Mothma and her daughter getting married, which of course was this big ethical quagmire from season 1, right? But I think it is kind of fun to see that Luthen and Co are sending off Tay Kolma, her financier. He's clearly being sent off to die. You had Faye Marseille's character, her sister, her girlfriend Cinta, who we met in season 1, is that pilot. So that's clearly a one-way trip. He's gone, and I'm curious if Mon Mothma's storyline is going to move ahead a lot, because at this point she's still acting as a senator, right? The Senate's still existing and has some semblance of meaning to the way the Empire operates, right? So I wonder how quickly we get to that Gorman massacre story where the open rebellion and the exile of people like Mon Mothma, how quickly will that happen, right? Remains to be seen. Be curious if Bail Organa shows up on the show. Certainly possible, right? Jimmy Smits has played the character a fair amount at this point. We know K2SO will show up. They haven't met yet, but we know they will, judged by Rogue One. And it's confirmed, obviously, Alan Tudyk reprising the role, so that'll be fun. And yeah, like I said, I just have complete faith in this creative team. I really have no reason not to believe in this story having a satisfying payoff and ending. And again, despite the fact that we know the fate of the lead, we don't know the fate of Luthen, right? I think people are really attached to Luthen. His, everything speech from season 1 is iconic. That's some of the best 2 minutes of Star Wars we've ever had, So whenever Luthen inevitably doesn't make it, I think it's going to really land. So looking forward to that. Hopefully we get some more Saw Gerrera. We'll see. But yeah, look, there's still 9 episodes to go. So let's go. Let me know, though, what do you think of Andor Season 2 thus far? What are you most looking forward to seeing with this second and final season of the celebrated Star Wars series? And for more TV reviews, subscribe. I'll see you next time. What's up, all Mike Nostalgia Dave here with my 2025 XXL freshman list predictions. I've been making these predictions for 9 straight years now. I do very well at this, get over 50% correct every year. So keep watching to find out who I expect to make the list. Of course, XXL Freshman has gone through quite the transformation culturally over the past, few years, as the influence of traditional media in terms of breaking rap careers is less integral than it used to be. Artists are able to find success and find an audience using social media, using the internet. Easier access, in theory, to virality via TikTok and things of that nature. Being able to use distribution without signing, full major label record deals anymore. The game has changed, even if it's still a very competitive landscape. It's still hard to stand out. The artists I'm going to talk about are not dominant artists from a consumption standpoint, so I think the concept of a freshman in rap still makes a lot of sense. And hip-hop remains really the only genre that you could credibly make a list like this every single year. And even though on the high end, it feels like rap is in a bit of a static period, as we're not breaking new megastars all too much right now. We're in a quieter time. There's still a ton of stuff going on below the surface, underground, and just nascent artists that are popular only with people that are really paying attention, only popular with young people. So there's still, I think, a lot to really get into here. And a bunch of artists I think are quite good. I think this is still going to be a pretty good list. So we might as well just jump right in. So I'm going to go through everyone I think is in a contention here. Everyone I'm going to talk about is on XXL's website as someone you can vote for the 10th spot. So everyone I'm going to talk about is someone XXL themselves consider a freshman. I'm going to stick to that. It does not mean, they don't pick people outside of that list. That has happened before. And of course, it's not always an exact science. Artists decline the list for whatever reason, whether they feel like they got overlooked in a past year and are moved beyond the need for this now, whatever the reason is. There's a story history of artists that could have made freshman list a certain year and didn't pick it for whatever reason, right? So all those normal caveats still apply. We're going to jump through here and let's just kind of get into it. The funny thing is we're just going to start right off with Jello because, in January 2025, I was not expecting to talk about LiAngelo Ball as a contender for XXL freshman this year. But LiAngelo Ball, of course, older brother of Lonzo and LaMelo Ball of the NBA, didn't work out for him with the basketball side of things, but kind of out of nowhere from the clouds, Jello, as his rap name goes, released Tweaker, and Tweaker became the first rap hit of 2025 for sure. And now at this point it has 100 million streams, big co-sign with Lil Wayne remix. Jello very quickly signed to Def Jam, performed at Rolling Loud last minute, performed at the NBA All-Star Weekend. And most importantly, people like the song. It's a throwback song, the more 2000s vibes for sure, but people like the song. People think the song is good. People actually think that Jello and his creative team actually have something here, and that's just not something we expected. So I think Jello, whether he actually picks the nomination and joins the list, something I could talk myself into either way with, to be honest. On one hand, he's already quite famous person. He actually comes across as pretty funny and charming if you watch his podcast appearances with Lonzo. Of course, he's already quite wealthy as well. So whether he feels like he needs this or not, I don't know. But, on the other hand, I think it would make sense for him as a way to further legitimize his rap career. He only released, I think, one or two other singles since Tweaker. So he's, of course, very much a freshman with no project to his name. So I think he's worthy, and I'll just put him in, whether he picks it or not. But I think Jello, who's, 26 years old, actually kind of on the older side, I guess, for the freshman criteria. But yeah, I think he'll go. I mean, still at this point, he's still at 4.7 million monthly listeners on Spotify. That's not the end all be all, but that's kind of the easiest metric to point to. So that's what I'm going to continue to cite. So yeah, Jello from Los Angeles. Can't believe we're saying this, but that's what we're doing. Moving on, and I think everyone else from here on out, you would not really consider much of a celebrity, at least outside of, hip hop circles, hip hop head circles per se. But Jello actually has a decent amount of normal fame, I guess. But yeah, moving on, I'm going to say Aaliyah's Interlude from Atlanta, still only 21 years old, 2.1 million monthly listeners on Spotify. Still an independent artist, but, back in 2023, her song It Girl has now 168.5 million streams on Spotify. Massive song. I think it's kind of a bop, kind of a banger for sure. I'm a big fan of the track. She hasn't released all that much music, though. No project still to her name. She did actually have an acting debut on FX's The English Teacher last year, but still quite young, still quite, early in her career. But I think there's been enough buzz and enough, early success with a song like It Girl that I think she makes a lot of sense, to be honest. And, has enough, I think, core technical rap ability that you see in a song like It Girl that the fun, light nature of that song is not lost on anyone. So yeah, Aaliyah's Interlude, Jello to start us off. I think both of them will make the list. Everyone else I'm going to talk about, I think, is in the mix. Not everyone I'm going to mention, of course, is in my top 10. So next up, we have Bayswag, 25 years old, from New York, specifically Queens, 957,000 monthly listeners on Spotify. Bayswag should stand out to you because he, of course, is the co-creator of Fisher, the Cash Cobain song, and he's on one or two other Cash Cobain songs. Of course, Cash Cobain, the face of Sexy Drill, the kind of latest iteration of drill. At least it was the latest iteration of drill last year, right? The thing with Bayswag, though, is I don't know if he's really done enough and made a big enough name for himself to make the list, this year. the XXL has kind of like a, checkered history with like people that are kind of following one another, right? Like, I think of like Playboy Cardi made XXL like the year after a lot of his peers did, right? He didn't make it till 2017 after the famous 2016 list. Bass-wise, though, I feel like he's so connected to Cash Cobain, and Cash Cobain, of course, made the list last year. I'm not really sure if, because he doesn't have a standout like song of his own, And of course, Cash Cobain had so much influence as a producer and a creator and the face of a new subgenre, right? So I'm really sure about Bass-Swag. New York between Cash Cobain last year, Lola Brooke the year before. New York is a pretty steady presence on the list. If Bass-Swag doesn't make it, though, I don't really think there's too many other true contenders, unfortunately, as much as I ride for New York. So, yeah, I'm going to have Bass-Swag off the list, but certainly in the mix. Next up, we have BLP Kosher, 24 years old, from Florida. Florida, of course, Broward County specifically continues to be a hotbed for new faces, and a lot of people come up out of Broward. A lot of people flame out of Broward. Obviously, a lot of famous controversy, of course, in the last 8 years or so down there. But BLP Kosher, he's actually less popular than I thought. 850,000 monthly listeners. His biggest song, Special K, 42 million streams on Spotify. Signed to Encore Records. Has a bunch of projects out, 4 projects. I think he's kind of like a classic, like freshman. And his rapping style, I guess, vaguely reminiscent of someone like Babytron, I guess you could say. But yeah, I feel like you just see his name a lot recently, and he kind of makes sense as a freshman, and like especially of this moment. So I'm gonna go with him. Next up is Humankind. Of course, the oldest guy I'm gonna talk about on the list. He's 33 years old, from India. I believe he's now Houston based. 9.2 million monthly streams on Spotify, monthly listeners. He is the most consumed artist I'm going to talk about because Humankind has the massive song Big Dogs from last year, 422 million streams. Got the big cosign with the A$AP Rocky feature and performed that with Rocky at Rolling Loud. And Humankind, he doesn't have any projects to his name, but it's kind of rapidly risen in fame, especially in India. He met Modi, for crying out loud. But honestly, like, Big Dogs, like, I think it blew people's mind because, he just kind of came out of nowhere, and it was like, he's a banger, like a great rapper for sure, right? And, the music video is very impressive as well, like, very much like a late bloomer, given there was no hype, really buzz around him. And I think he makes a lot of sense as someone to make this list because despite, the Big Dogs, numbers it's running up, I don't think Humankind is quite famous at all, and he doesn't have enough music to his name to not be considered a freshman still, despite his age. So I think he makes a lot of sense. He's a very exciting pick, to be honest. I really want to hear what's next from him, so I really hope they go with him. And, what is the history of Asian rappers from any country in Asia making the list? Is there even anyone? Really? There's not too many, at least. Of course, there are people they could have picked in the past that they didn't. Think of people, 88 Rising, for example. The fact remains, though, that there's not been an Indian guy on the list. That'd be pretty cool. All right, so that's Humankind. I have him in. So that gives us 3 people have in already. Next up is Ian. 19 years old, from St. Louis, 5.5 million monthly listeners on Spotify. Biggest song, Magic Johnson, 121 million streams. 2 projects to his name. I mentioned Ian, last year as someone I didn't expect to make it. And he's in the mix again. He's on their website. And Ian, of course, a white guy that uses crazy autotune and has very inauthentic lyrics. I think Ian sucks. I've always thought Ian sucked. He does have a level of popularity. I almost assumingly is completely white fans. But yeah, I think Ian sucks. And I think it's a bad message to pick a guy like him because he's just so clearly a fraud. But I would not be shocked if he made the list, honestly, because he continues to find success. He seems to tour pretty well. He has some songs that have run it up. So, on the merits, numbers wise, you could justify it. But I think from a curatorial point of view, which XXL does take into account, I don't think he's going to make it. Kind of reminds me of like when Bad Baby never made the list, same kind of thing. I just don't take him seriously, and I don't think XXL should either. If you like Ian, leave a comment. Let me know why you think he actually should make the list. But yeah, he's a no for me. Also a no for me is Caribou, 28 years old from Atlanta, 1.1 million monthly listeners. I talked about Caribou last year as someone I actually thought should have made the list. And whenever they do this thing where like someone's on the on their voting list multiple years and never makes it, they never end up picking them. Like I picked Kenny Mason 3 years in a row, and they kept putting him as an eligible and then never picked him. Right, like, you got to move on at some point. And XXL doesn't really go back all that much. Also, Caribou, obviously like her big hit a few years ago was Box the 40. Kind of came up as being affiliated with Lil Yachty's Concrete Boys Collective. I think they've actually fallen out since then. But she hasn't made a whole lot of noise since last year when I mentioned her. And I actually think she's less hot now than she was before. So, yeah, I just don't think there's a good case for her right now, given who else she's competing with, to be honest. If she did make it, it's not a bad pick or anything like that. But I'm just not going to pick it this year. I don't expect it. Next up, I have Laser Dim 7000, 23 years old from Georgia. He has a bunch of projects to his name, just released one a few months ago. Only 1.9 million monthly listeners on Spotify. His biggest song, Laced Up, has 40 million streams. And I think probably the most high profile thing he's really done, though, is the Still in the Paint, Hard in the Paint cover freestyle song that Denzel Curry made. He has a feature on that. I'm not a huge fan of him by any means, but I do think he's pretty energetic and interesting enough, and still completely independent, which is pretty cool. Usually completely independent people don't make XXL, so perhaps that's a vote against him, but I think he's certainly in the mix, and I have him in, and I think he's someone to at least pay attention to moving forward. Someone else also in the mix for me is Lefty Gunplay, 30 years old from LA County, 661,000 monthly listeners. Had a feature on OGZ's album recently, but of course, most well known for his feature on Kendrick Lamar's TV Off. TV Off, this second biggest song off GNX following Luther, right? I think Lefty Gunplay, who's not the only, relatively unpopular or unknown, underknown LA rapper on GNX, but he's probably the one with the biggest profile. And I think he's in the mix. I just don't know if there's quite enough outside of the Kendrick connection to get him through here, but I would not be shocked if he made the list. Someone I have definitely making the list is Osama-san, 21 years old from Charleston, 1 million monthly listeners on Spotify. Biggest song is Whole World is Free. He's got, I think, 4 projects at this point, too. Osama-san, despite his young age, has, I think, really quickly built himself up as another player in the rage rap, plug rap, whatever the fuck you call it these days, descended from Yeet and Cardi before Yeet and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We always talk about this genre and how much it continues to evolve, and there's all these kinds of new faces, right? Last year, I mentioned someone, Net Spend, as someone in the mix, right? I mean, it's just such a vast genre. And I think Ken Carson, another famous face of this at this point. Osama-san, I'm not a fan of this music. Obviously, it's heavily auto-tuned. You can listen to my Cardi review. Like, I'm not really into this stuff, but it's quite popular, and I think he's the best pick to represent this subgenre of rap right now, and that subgenre should be represented if there's an eligible candidate, because I think that's one of the biggest and fastest growing and mutating versions of rap you have right now, to be honest. So I think Osama-san makes a ton of sense. More my style would be Ray Vaughn, 29 years old from Long Beach, 609,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, just dropped his debut album last week. Ray Vaughn is signed to Top Dog Entertainment, and the debut album has a J-Rock and Isaiah Rashad feature. I think he's actually linked up with Isaiah beforehand. Ray Vaughn is pretty great. I think that song Trade Line from a few years ago is awesome. Doghouse is really good. He's very capable, very cool. And not that a TDE, being on TDE automatically gets you on the list, despite the fact that most rappers on TDE have made XXL freshmen. I think the only one that didn't make it recently was Reason, I think. But Doechii, of course, made it a handful of years ago. For the people who were paying attention, like myself, Doechii's now rising star power was not completely unforeseen. Ray Vaughn, I don't expect to become Doechii from a profile standpoint, but I do think he's quite good from everything I've heard. And I think he makes a ton of sense for this list as someone who, again, a bit of a late bloomer, 29 years old, but doesn't have a whole lot of, music out there under his name yet. So I think he's a great pick. Someone I was a bit surprised to see on XXL's website was Rio DeYoung OG, who's 30 years old from Flint, Michigan. Rio, he was, I think, incarcerated the last 4 years or so, but very much one of the faces, one of the most commonly cited names when you come to think of like the Flint specific sound and style of rap. But I just never really thought of him as a freshman because he has so many projects at this point. It's like way too many to be considered a freshman to me. And it's not that they don't pick older people sometimes, right? Late 20s, early 30s, right? I think of like Absol and Schoolboy Q's age when they made it, or Action Bronson. They do it from time to time. It depends, how the career went. But Rio, I just feel like he's not a freshman, and it's weird, like they include him, but I don't think they're going to pick him. I don't know. That's a weird one for me. I kind of struggled with like how to think about him as a freshman pick here. Next up, I have Skrilla, 25 years old from Philadelphia, 2.3 million monthly listeners on Spotify, signed to UMG. Yeah, I think he's just kind of like a established, like, mid-tier new rapper, so to speak. He just feels like someone's going to be on the list to me. Also in the mix is Xavier Sobeys, 21 years old from New York, 612,000 monthly listeners on Spotify. I actually mentioned him last year, someone, kind of in the mix. But I feel like if you're going to pick Osama-san, you're kind of market correcting Xavier Sobeys and don't really need to pick him. I just don't know if he's really like burst out of the shadow of his affiliation with like Netspend and things like that. So I don't know if there's a great case for him, especially because someone else kind of similar to him I'm going to pick instead, which would be Yapo JJ, 21 years old from Alabama, 250,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, but he has a ton of projects out. And he's someone I would love to see like XXL like kind of bet on and throw on there as someone quickly rising. So we'll see. And then lastly, I have 310 Baby from LA, only 19 years old, but 3.3 million monthly listeners on Spotify. His song Soak City has 220 plus million streams on Spotify, peaked at 53. And yeah, he seems like someone who's still quite young, but already has, a hit under his belt, kind of a obvious pick to me. So those are the people I feel like are the most in the mix. Of course, there's dozens of other names on the website to consider, and I'm sure there's going to be someone on the list that I didn't mention just now. That's how it always goes, of course. But these are the people that immediately stand out to me as, people truly in the conversation here. So let me know who you think most makes sense to make the list, who you would like to see make the list, even if you don't think maybe they will. Let me know. And just to recap, here are my 2025 XXL freshman list predictions. Jello from LA, Aaliyah's Interlude from Atlanta, BLP Kosher from Florida, Can Humankind from India and Houston, Laserdym 7000 from Georgia, Osama-san from Charleston, Ray Vaughn from Long Beach, Skrilla from Philadelphia, Yapo JJ from Alabama, and 310 Baby from Los Angeles. Let me know who you think should make the XXL list this year. And of course, come back when the list does come out. I'll be reacting to who makes the list and analyzing that once we know. It usually happens in June, the June cover of the traditional XXL magazine. Then we'll get all the ciphers and the freestyles and the fun stuff there. So let me know who you think's in the mix. Come back when it's time to talk about the actual list itself. And of course, stick around if you like rap reviews. See the playlist below for all the projects I've reviewed recently. And I'll see you next time. All right, that's going to do it for the podcast this week. Next week, we have Marvel's Thunderbolts. I think there's a lot of excitement and hopes for that film to get Marvel back on track after Captain America 4, so we'll see about that. We also have the next Star Wars animated series, Tales of the Underworld on Disney+, the conclusion of The Righteous Gemstones Season 4 on HBO. That's the series finale. A Simple Favor 2, it's called Another Simple Favor. Blake Lively, Anna Kendrick reuniting. Blake Lively has a lot going on right now, so we'll see how that entertains the movie itself, if at all. And also The Surfer, new Nicolas Cage movie. So make sure you subscribe, youtube.com/nostalgiapod, linktree.com/nostalgiapod, see links below. Get the best of 2025 Spotify post link below. Let me know it's good, and I'll see you next week.